Point of order, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to raise the fact this is not a new meeting. This is an adjourned. Sorry, this is an adjourned meeting. This is an adjournment of a meeting.
Councillor O'Brien, please sit down. I haven't even opened the meeting yet.
Wait for it,
Council, can I welcome everybody to this afternoon's council meeting, which was reconvened from yesterday evening. Before we resume the debate on the motion of school uniform, could I ask that we receive any apologies for the absence in today's meeting, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've received apologies from Councillors Buick, E and P Gibson, Greener, Loughlin, Samuels, G Smith, Scaplehorn, Spedding, A Wilson and Honorary Alderman Tate and Forbes.
Any further apologies?
Apologies for Martin Haswell, Niall Hodson, Julia Potts and Heather Fagan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies from Councillor Keith Jenkins. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And apologies from Councillor Cunningham as well. And sorry, and Melanie Thornton as well. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies from Councillor Tony Taylor, please.
Apologies for Councillor Michael Butler.
Councillor Lawson.
Councillor Spain.
Councillor Oliver.
Councillors Blackett and Howe, please, Mr. Mayor.
Is that it? Yeah. Okay. So just before we start again, what I'd like to do is remind everybody that this meeting's being filmed this afternoon. The Deputy Mayor, Harry Truman, and the Mayoress, Dorothy Truman, will be leaving at about 3:15 because we have a citizenship ceremony to officiate this afternoon. So they'll need to actually be there to do that in my place. So we'll now continue the debate on the motion regarding school uniform. Councillor Farthing, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it was interesting when we were debating this last night that few of the speakers made it political, yet I would have thought it was one of the most political topics that we could come across. And I suppose, from my perspective, I think the Liberal Democrats bringing this forward, I would say to them, I think it's very hypocritical. Because it was your party that aided and abetted the Tories in their austerity policies. The freeze on benefits for working age adults will have had a direct impact on many Sunderland residents who are parents. Bearing in mind that 38% of our population areas are within the 20% most deprived areas in England. 22.8% of Sunderland children are living in poverty, compared to 16.8% nationally. Or to put it another way, Sunderland has over 40,000 housing benefit and council tax support claimants within the city, with the majority claiming both benefits. The breakdown of the 40,000 is split 63% to working age and 37% to pension age. So the working poor in Sunderland amount to 36%, to 36,000 on these measures, and there are many more. And Councillor Wood referred to universal credit and the misery that that has brought. Having said all of that, I will support the motion, but with a very heavy heart. I would much rather that people earned a living wage so that they were able to provide for their children appropriately without resource to schemes. The proposal is a sticking plaster on the gaping, oozy, bloody wound of poverty. I do not have influence over the choice of school uniform that has been the business of schools under local management for a very long year, back into the 1980s. However, when I visit schools, I am told that they have schemes in place to support vulnerable pupils and families. Some, as Councillor Ty attested to, provide a full school uniform to all pupils. So that we may try to encourage to ensure that school uniforms requirements are not overcomplicated, but that is all we can do. And I am always surprised at how many uniforms include a pleated skirt. Even with today's stay crease materials, I found that to make them look acceptable after washing, pressing is required. Not every household has access to an iron, which disadvantages some pupils. I would be very much against abandoning school uniforms, as I do feel it removes the opportunity for one-upmanship within the school population. As a school governor, I have always advocated for practical washable items. I also feel that the pupil population of a school should be consulted on any proposed changes to the uniform. And I recall to everyone's surprise in a primary school when the pupils advised in a poll a preference for a shield-shaped badge as opposed to a circular logo, which they could buy to adhere to their clothes. Looking to our concerns about the climate emergency, we must also look at materials that do not harm the watercourses. Polyester fibres, I am told, should be trapped in washing machine filtration systems, which we do not yet have in this country. At my behest, poverty-proofing audits have been offered to all Sunderland schools. Some have already completed these and have amended policies and procedures to avoid marginalising children who live in poverty. Currently, TFC is working with a further few schools on poverty proofing and hopes to extend the scheme in future to all schools. Children with lone parents are more likely to be living in poverty. For these parents in Sunderland, there is a charity that can help with the cost of school uniform and some associated costs of higher education. It is the Sunderland Orphanage and Educational Trust, and our Mayor sits on that and has drawn this charity to my attention. The charity expends around £20,000 per year in individual grants. And I would say again that I would much prefer families did not have to resort to charity or schemes. I would prefer that benefits had not been frozen and that we had a mandatory living wage rather than the minimum wage, and that universal credit had never been introduced in its format. We have heard concerns about schools raising funds through a commission on uniforms and photography. I would urge all school governors to look at the way that free school meal service runs in their schools, especially if they use independent caterers, as the credits from unused free meals often find their way back into the caterer's pocket, or, exceptionally, the school fund, are not the underprivileged recipient. The government's austerity programme has restricted school funding across the country, and a recent national survey found that parents of the parents surveyed, 51% were concerned about the cost. The cost of uniforms, as been highlighted in the motion, was of concern to 46%, followed by school trips at 44% and school meals 19%. Almost 2/5, 38% of parents had been asked to donate to school fund in the last year. And they said that school holidays money was a constant worry. Now, here in Sunderland, we have attempted to alleviate holiday hunger with play and youth service activity during holidays, funded by each of our 5 area committees, and they provide a nutritious meal or snack. We must look at how we can cut the cost of a school uniform, because it does hit the poorest families. In the survey, 22% had been asked to pay for school clubs that used to be free. 20% had been asked to pay for events such as sports day or concerts. 16% have been asked to supply teaching equipment. 11% have been asked to help with maintenance activities such as redecorating classrooms and cutting grass and hedgerows. 6% have been asked to supply essentials such as toilet paper. And all of this information has been available on the School Cuts site, with individual head teachers testifying to what they've had to do in their schools. I will add that the survey was conducted before the additional 7.1 billion extra for school funding was announced, but it was just an announcement. Schools are still waiting for that funding. When asked what schools should spend this additional money on, the parents said 55% said it should go on learning resources such as textbooks and science equipment. 43% said on IT equipment. 39% said child mental health services. 36% said maintaining school buildings. 36% said school trips, and 34% said schools with special education needs and disabilities. Parent Kind Chief Executive, who ran the survey, said, "These findings clearly show that parents are worried about the increasing cost of sending their child to school and the impact that squeezed budgets are having on the day-to-day delivery of a good education. Schools should regularly engage with families to fully understand the challenges they face. Many already do this well. But no school funding decision that impacts directly on the families in their community should be made without consultation, particularly if it increases the financial burden placed on parents or results in the unintended consequences of mums and dads participating less in their child's education." National Association of Head Teachers General Secretary Paul Whiteman said, "Parents and carers are not the only ones who worry about austerity. Tragically, children are well aware of their families' money troubles. Our members tell us that children's worries leave them unable to learn and enjoy school. They are often embarrassed and ashamed. It's a message that sticks in the throat of everyone who has young people's best interest at heart. So I will start as I ended. The basis of your motion is hypocritical. Your party supported the austerity policies which have had these awful consequences." Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Farley. Councillor Kevin Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will also be supporting this motion, and I actually welcome Councillor O'Brien and Haswell for bringing this to full council. It's nice to see a relevant motion that will actually have an impact on families across the city, unlike some of those proposed from the party opposite yesterday. However, I don't agree with Councillor O'Brien that this isn't political. Everything done politically will have an impact like this on people's lives. The Lib Dems are in power, and you propped up a Conservative government who implemented welfare cuts and austerity that has caused the rise in food banks, in-work poverty, and the underlying factors as to why families are in this position. Your new leader, Joe Swinson, voting more times than the Tories to implement those austerity cuts and welfare. It might have been late last night, Mr. Mayor, and after a long day, but I didn't see any Conservatives councillors raise their hands to speak on this motion. Is that correct?
We'll have a look into that. Councillor Johnson, will you carry on?
Quite happy to stand up and discuss a points-based system to become mayor, but when it comes to helping struggling families with the cost of school uniforms, it seems like it's silence. I hope if they do make any comments and support, they understand what families are facing across the city due to their Conservative government. I've spoken with head teachers from primary schools on my own ward in the Copt Hill and heard the heartbreaking stories of teachers actually going out and buying school shoes for children in their classes due to the poverty and deprivation in parts of our communities. As well as food banks, we even have volunteers setting up school uniform donation collection points at times during the year in Horton. Mr. Mayor, I repeat what I've already said in this chamber previously, from a report from the UN Poverty Envoy to the UK in November last year, which clearly states, in the fifth largest economy in the world, austerity could have easily spared the poor if the political will had existed to do so. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can I just confirm, Councillor Johnson, that your statement about the Conservatives was correct, that they didn't actually stand up? Councillor Rebecca Atkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I also will be supporting the motion this afternoon, but like Councillor Farthing said, it's with a heavy heart. The stench of hypocrisy from the pit today is breathtaking. But I tell you what, it's not as much of a hypocritical statement as I saw in Sunderland Echo when George Howe was demanding more police on the streets of Sea Road when his own party had cut them. Fascinating. So sad George is not here today. Are you finished over there? Can I continue? Thank you. Thank you.
You have my permission.
Oh. Tell you what, you and Stephen O'Brien have been passing notes about your choices around women. Dear me, he thought I was stupid. And you're saying you're giving us permission to speak. Dear me.
Councillor Atkinson, please can you stick to the motion, please?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, but I'm
please.
continually insulted in this chamber.
Well, please, if you could stick to the motion.
Thank you. So, the Lib Dems, wow, the architects of misery alongside our coalition chums. Unbelievable. I'm shocked that Councillor O'Brien's brought this. I'm absolutely shocked. It's so sad, especially when...
Hey,
sorry, Mr Mayor, I can't continue.
Can you just stop? Look, there's a lot of business to conduct in this meeting, and I want to hear the business. I don't want to hear you or you, Councillor Essel, unless you're standing up and speaking to us. Do you understand?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, apologies.
Do you understand? Councillor Atkinson, again.
Thank you,
please.
Mr Mayor. I do appreciate that. Silly women. Tut, tut, tut. Bringing points of order. So, as I was saying, the Lib Dems, alongside the Tories, are the architects of misery. They've pushed families to the brink. Jo Swinson, the sister, actually wants a statue to Margaret Thatcher rather than pushing on and trying to help our families in crisis. It's fascinating. The hypocrisy is just terrible. I'm astounded as well when the Lib Dems under Nick Clegg actually signed a coalition deal that stated they would be stricter on uniforms and the implementation of their policies. And then we have this band of Lib Dems, the Wearside Lib Dems, that are just trying to claim victory over things that this side of the chamber we have tried so hard to eradicate, and that's poverty, in-work poverty, people who are struggling. And I just find it, really, really sad that they can't see that. But I really hope that the Lib Dems just have one thing in their mind today, and that words are cheap, but actions are expensive. So I really hope that whilst they're setting their stall out and bringing all of these policies, that they actually are standing shoulder to shoulder with our families who are struggling, that they are trying to encourage people to donate to uniform banks, that they are, if they can afford it, taking some spare socks or polo shirts that I hear so many people in our communities are doing week in, week out to help those who, through no fault of their own, because these are children that we're talking about, it doesn't matter what their families are doing or whether they're in work or not, this is not the fault of children. This is the fault of a coalition government who have systematically tried to dismantle the working poor and the poor of this country. And frankly, Mr Mayor, I find it atrocious. So, Councillor O'Brien, words are cheap, actions are expensive. Please remember that.
Deputy Leader.
Mr Mayor. Like many colleagues who have spoken, Mr Mayor, I'll be supporting the motion, but I supported the general principle of it. I think it's a good thing, but I do worry around the actual practicalities of it. As many members have spoken, we don't have powers to tell academies or others what to do, but I think the general principle of it is well-meaning and happy to support that. But just to put on record, I represent Hendon Ward alongside Councillor Scanlon and Councillor McLennan, and we often are approached by families who are just struggling to get by, struggling for uniforms and various other things just to make ends meet. And they're often the victim of universal credit, or they've been sanctioned by the DWP for whatever reason. And I wasn't going to speak in the debate until very late. Now I decided, the Brings Back Fairness, Councillor O'Brien said, 1 in 6 parents can't afford uniforms, problem that society can't afford to live in 2019. I don't know how he stood there and said it with a straight face, Mr Mayor. I honestly don't. The fact that you only have to look onto Twitter and see Polly Mackenzie, a former special advisor to Nick Clegg, who was then the Deputy Prime Minister, who says 4 years ago the Lib Dem ministers started agitating for a 5p charge on plastic bags. It took us months to persuade Cameron and Osborne. A further comment on the thread on Twitter, Mr Mayor, says, we finally got the policy in an eve of conference trade in return for tightening benefit sanctions. That's the bare bones of what the Lib Dems done for 5 years, selling the souls out for a red box, selling the souls out for a seat at the big boys' table. I think it's an absolute disgrace. And before they start trying to rewrite history and bringing forward motions to look clever and look big, they want to re-examine the conscience for the misery they've put on people who are representing Hendon. I think it's a disgrace the way they've done it, Mr Mayor, but the general principle of it I will support. But I just thought it worth putting that on record, that they can't have it both ways. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Councillor Barbara McLennan, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I, like my colleague on the higher echelons, do not intend to speak on this motion, so I'll keep it brief, and it's no way as eloquent as the prior speakers. However, I'm speaking really on behalf of myself and Councillor Scanlon. Now, you look at Councillor Scanlon and you look at me and think, what on earth have we got in common? Well, we both went to Ryhope Robert Richardson Grammar School, Technical School, and we both benefited from a scheme that was run by the council to get free school uniforms. If I hadn't got a free school uniform, I would not have been able to take up the place in that grammar school. And I was the first member of my family, and along with Mel Spedding, we were the first ones in our street that had been privileged enough to get that place. Linda, I'm not sure if your parents were as poor as mine. Mine used to drink all his money. Yeah, so they were working poor. So without help, I think it was through the Mayor's boot and shoe fund, but I'm not sure, we would not have been able to attend that school. Okay, you say, well, what about that? Well, if we hadn't attended that school, we would not have been able to benefit from the initiatives that were introduced by Labour in terms of breaking down class barriers, breaking down equality barriers, and ending up where we are now. And what could be better than sitting in a council chamber on after Thursday afternoon, one wonders. Linda has several businesses, I've had several professions and won awards, largely because of the opportunities that were afforded to us through a school uniform. So yes, I will be supporting the motion, and so will Linda. However, I too have reservations. My first reservation has to be the Department for Education quoting a school uniform at £212. All I can say is, are they shopping at Selfridges? Do they know where you can get uniforms at Aldi's and Asda and Lidl? Yeah? So I think the figure is really unrealistic. I've done a quick calculation, and this is based on my experience as a grandmother, because I buy my grandchildren school uniforms, and their parents are working poor. And I think I spent about £50 on each child. So where they get the 212 from, I don't know. Where the Children's Society gets the figure of 340 worries me, because that effectively diminishes the value of the voluntary sector's arguments to support a cause. It just gets dismissed and say, oh, you're talking rubbish, we're not going to hear you. And now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, I'm not in favour, blatantly obvious, I'm not in favour of buying all children's school uniforms. We cannot realistically afford it. What we can do is support existing schemes that are being run and try and expand them. Those that run in school in terms of uniform swap shops. There's a one on High Street now, I think it is, isn't it? It's a big one on High Street that's actually focusing on school uniform swaps. Charity shops, links with schools, perhaps to have uniform days where they swap over. And perhaps for the very, very poor, that we've explored every other avenue with, then we could look at some kind of hardship fund. But to be honest, it's humiliating. It can be quite humiliating if it's not handled correctly. I remember standing in a separate queue for free school dinners. Did you get free school dinners? No. Oh, you went home. Well, I did go home, all four of us, for half an hour to get a dinner until the health visitor said that we were entitled to free school meals. So, in terms of that, I think there is an issue about stigma, and we need to look at that very, very carefully. Now, in terms of the other thing I would really welcome in this motion is actually the idea of encouraging schools not to have uniform requirements which are overcomplicated and restrict where they can be purchased. Right, well, we both got our blazers at Caslow's. Right, you could get them for Caslow's or the Co-op, yes? Now, we didn't go to the Co-op because there was a stigma attached to the Co-op because it was a different colour, it wasn't burnt. Right? But we did buy the badge separate so we could stitch it on our pockets. So, in other words, the cost of the blazer was reduced because it was not embroidered into the fabric. What worries me is the growing trend that I can spot of schools having very customised uniforms, very customised school bags, sweatshirts, coats, all of that paraphernalia which is not essential to a child being able to go to school. And the reason, it's perfectly obvious, and you can check it up, and I think Councillor Farthing's referred to it, is it's schools making profits on the backs of the parents and the children who want to demonstrate their pride and sense of belonging to a distinct school community. All we need for the children is to wear trousers or skirts, sweatshirts and polo shirts or shirts with ties, and summer dresses in the summer. That's all we need. We don't need fancy badges. If we have fancy badges, let's get the schools just to sell them separately so the parents can stitch them on the jumper that they can afford, instead of giving the schools a nice little backhander from the provider. And let's be honest, it does happen. Right, oh, thank you, right, okay. But the problem with this is we can't enforce that kind of rule. We cannot enforce that kind of equality rule because the Tories removed all influence that councillors had on schools. They systematically reduced it through their free schools, through their academies, through their changes in the government, the governing body regulations, etc. We no longer have the influence to stop schools doing this. We no longer have the influence to stop schools doing it where school photographs are concerned. £26 for a set of school photographs. If you've got 4 kids and the school doesn't cooperate and take one photograph as a 4, that's an awful lot of money, but how much is the schools raking out of it? We have to ask ourselves that. It's not a nice palatable question, but we do have to ask it. Now the issue is if we don't support some methods of uniform purchase, the danger for those children are they'll have to stay at home. They won't be able to go to school. It'll just be like in the 1900s where children didn't have shoes. We'll have the urchins on the street. That's what we'll have. So we've got to find some method of supporting them. They'll stay at home. We'll get increased absenteeism. I remember when my mother used to literally walk in the kitchen and she'd take my school skirt off me and wash it overnight for the following day because I didn't have 2 skirts. I only had 1. So you get absenteeism if the children haven't got uniforms or haven't got a change of clothing now. And you've got the big issue, the really big issue, which is school shoes. Now, there are schools that I know of, mainly in Nottingham where my granddaughters live, where you have to have a pair of shoes to walk into school. You have to have a separate pair of Wellingtons for in the school when they're walking out to activities. You have to have special shoes for gym. and special indoor shoes. Now, Linda and I can remember the indoor shoes and the black shoes and the grey socks. They were horrible. Do you remember the grey socks? So this city is not as bad as some cities are, but we have to stop it before it really gets hard, as it were. And we have to take a step back and make sure that we can support parents to provide for their children. And we can do that with liaising with wholesalers, with existing suppliers, asking them to offer an increased discount, perhaps based on an attendance of the previous year. So if your child has attended well, then you take the voucher along and you get a discount off a school shirt or a school pair of trousers. That kind of thing I think is more positive than offering a handout, right, of a free school uniform. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLennan. Councillor Juliana Herron, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also, I do support this notice of motion, but I've got to say it was a great heavy heart to do so. I remember in 1984 when we had to scrape for a uniform. I've been in that situation where people are now, and the same people are doing to us and do our families and our relatives and people who live in Sunderland that did it to us in 1984 with the Lib Dems. Also, I wasn't going to mention Margaret Thatcher, but Rebecca reminded me of the statue, and this is the lady, I say that, who took the milk off our school children. I also want to praise our local community groups. Me and my colleagues work very closely to Space 4 in Hortonley Spring. They did the collection for school uniforms, and no, they weren't all second-hand school uniforms. The generosity of the people in the coalfield amazes me all the time, because these people have gone through a lot in struggles, but there were donations of packs of 3 of polo shirts, skirts, everything. They also now do a one for clothes, but it's for children up to 11 years old, where parents who is expecting maybe their first baby who can't afford things, and this is happening all the time. I'm sorry, Councillor O'Brien, it is not a funny thing or a smile. This is yes, but this is a very serious thing, and if you've got a family and you are struggling, you've been sanctioned, and I know this as a personal, as one of my families was sanctioned for nearly a year and really struggled how to survive, and she didn't have a family behind her, she would be really poverty, and it's hard. Now, I think school uniforms should be where you can buy them cheaply. I don't believe in some of these schools that you only can buy them from it's actually from the school, because they are the most expensive uniforms you could think of. As Councillor McLennan said, Aldi's, Lidl's, you can get rigged up in a school uniform, and then the quality is there. They're not cheap and nasty, the quality is there. I would say a full uniform for maybe it's a tenner. Now, if we only had a universal saying this in schools, it would be great, but we haven't, because we have the academies now and they have their own rules. Yes, some of us are on academies as school governors, but it is hard to change the academy situation with the school uniforms. I know one local school in my area, not in my ward, but very close, wanted to change the school uniform. He knew the parents would struggle. Actually, the children chose the uniform, what they wanted to wear. What this head teacher did, he supplied every child in that school with the school uniform. And he still does. Every child in that school has a school uniform to start school with in reception. I really admire this head teacher for doing that. But this was a few years ago now, and the school budgets have been cut and cut and cut, where I don't know if he could do that now. They are lucky to get the books, the pencils, the basic things in schools. As I said, I agree with the notice of motion, but I think it's a bit hypocritical to come from the Liberals, because they have been with, they sold their souls to the Tories to be in government, and it's part of their cuts with austerity, universal credit, bedroom tax, that our people in Sunderland and our areas have to struggle now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Heron. Councillor Martin Hasswell had reserved the right to reply, but he's not here.
Mr. Mayor, I wonder if you would hear an application from me. From me.
Is the point of order?
No, it's an application to speak. If I might explain, Mr. Mayor.
Just give us one moment. Just. I wasn't going to allow it, but I think some members want to hear what you want to say. Yes, please, can you?
Thank you very much indeed. It had been my intention to speak last night, but given the lateness of the hour when this debate started, and the number of people who indicated that they were going to speak, and the fact that we might well go on for a very long time, I didn't put up my hand, which is why I'm now asking for this application. And I'm speaking without my notes, so the memory isn't that good these days, so here goes. Uniforms are expensive. They can be very expensive depending upon the demands of the uniform or the financial position of the parents or guardians. My son's secondary school uniform was brown, so you know that he went to Southmore. When they introduced a black blazer, I was delighted because the cost of the uniform, the blazer, was halved, and he was just coming on for a new blazer. But I'd like to say a few words about my time in secondary education as a pupil. I'm looking at Councillor Truman as well, because I think he knows what I'm going to say. Our blazers were heavily braided with purple. The school pullover had the colours let into the neck. The school socks, when we wore short trousers in those days, had the colours let into the tops. And by gum, you had to have those colours matched across or you got into trouble. I was fine. I got a full uniform, 11-and-a-half-year-old, I'm walking up Swan Street, and I thought I was great. When I needed that uniform renewing because I'd grown, my guardians were surviving, or living, should I say, living on 2 old age pensions. And we couldn't afford a new blazer, not a school blazer, so I got a plain navy blue blazer, and my grandmother sewed on the school badge, which she took off my initial blazer. And you know, none of the other 29 boys and girls in that class said a word to me. There was no nastiness at all. They really were great. By the time I was in the 5th form, the school pullover with the colours let in had gone, and I was wearing a green crew neck pullover. There was a wonderful photograph taken of me wearing that, if you want proof. So yes, I fully support this motion, but I have been there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for your contribution.
Thank you for letting me speak, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Brien, you have the right to reply.
Yes. Thanks for everyone for the speeches. It seems to me that the Labour Party in Sunderland forgot who implemented the cut to the school uniforms. It was you lot in 2008, because I quote, Gillian from Together with Children said austerity hit local government in 2008 to 2009. So I don't know why you're shaking your head, because that's the truth. I can forward you that email if you quite like. Also, you were shaking your head. Also, the cost of it, the cost of it in Scotland's only £75,000 for a full nation. I'm sure with the cuts we're making to SRAs, we could support children and parents with school uniforms. To Barbara's point, we're not asking the council to supply all of school uniforms. We're asking council to supply some funding to alleviate the pressure of parents for some items of school uniforms. But I'd like to thank everyone for supporting the motion. I was trying to keep it non-political, but alas, that didn't happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Do we need to have an electronic vote on this, or is it agreed? Agreed? Thank you. We'll now deal with the notice of motion, which is on the subject of UK's exit from the EU. Can I call upon Councillor Doyle to read and move the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to propose the motion as follows. This council acknowledges that Sunderland voted to leave the European Union in 2016 and calls upon the city's 3 MPs to honour this result by facilitating the UK's exit from the EU.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Councillor MacDonald, would you like to second the motion, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to second the motion and reserve the right to speak.
Councillor Doyle, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And may I begin by thanking colleagues who have signed and expressed their support for this motion today. I think it is of an unquestionable importance that this council should consider and debate in explicit terms one of the fundamental principles by which we as elected members must abide. That principle, I submit to you, is democracy. And as someone who is able to set the tone for our discussion this afternoon, I would like to emphasise that this motion is a clear message to our members of Parliament. The electorate of Sunderland will not allow you to subvert their mandate, which was delivered in the greatest democratic exercise in this country's history. It is simply not acceptable to spit on the will of 61.3% of our voters, our masters, without this council putting its foot down. Now, I really do wish that I could say with confidence that this motion was not necessary, its purpose redundant, because Sunderland's MPs are determined in their efforts to implement the result of the referendum in 2016. I'm afraid to say, Mr. Mayor, that such a notion is nothing short of fanciful. Instead, we have seen parliamentarians from the so-called Brexit heartlands throw their weight behind efforts to stymie, frustrate and cancel the entire withdrawal process because they could just not accept that their side of the argument lost. They say that voters during the referendum were unable to comprehend the questions set out for them, the decision too complex for people to understand. As a solution, they suggest another referendum, another chance for the people to redeem themselves from their tremendous mistake. Well, let me assure those of that opinion now by saying that I knew exactly what I was doing when I decided to support Leave, and I do not require any patronising assistance or intervention from individuals who have had their proposals for ever closer union roundly rejected, not only in June 2016, but in the general election of 2017 and the European parliamentary elections of 2019. All victories for democracy which deserve to be respected, all instructions to parliamentarians which must now be implemented. To now renege on the unequivocal promises given by MPs would be an unprecedented betrayal of trust in modern times. So earth-shattering will the fallout be from the cancellation of Brexit that the very stability of our nation will be threatened. For clarity, this is not an issue of forceful imposition of a Eurosceptic view. Indeed, there are colleagues in the Conservative group who have differing views on EU membership to my own, and I completely respect and understand their opinions. However, what binds Conservative members here today is our unwavering commitment to democracy. In my concluding remarks to this debate, I hope to be able to say the same thing about the other council groups as well. whilst they clearly have political beliefs which are diametrically opposed to those held by the Conservatives, they are nevertheless councillors for whom I have the utmost respect and in whom I place a great deal of trust to stand by the wishes of their residents. Thankfully, we've already heard some encouraging noises from the Labour group which suggest their support for this motion. They were, after all, incensed with the behaviour of their own MPs for a period following their crushing local election defeat in May. Our esteemed leader, Councillor Miller, as ever gave a decidedly telling quote in the wake of the results in reference to Sunderland's electorate. He said, "They're not happy as a city which voted to leave, that we, the Labour Party, haven't allowed that to happen, and they see us as wanting to stay. That is far from helpful." For once, I'm in total agreement with Councillor Miller, and for that matter with Councillor Mordy's remarks from yesterday. And I look forward to both of them voting for this motion with characteristic gusto, especially in view of their own uncompromising remarks on the subject. As for the Liberal Democrats, I'm pleased to say that Councillor O'Brien has already confirmed in writing and through his favoured social media platform of Twitter that he will be voting for the motion which I'm proposing today. I must say this is in sharp contrast to the flagrantly illiberal, undemocratic policy of his national party. As I'm sure colleagues are aware, the Liberal Democrat Party conference has now adopted the view that, should Joe Swinson be invited to form a government, an unlikely prospect I know, then the new administration will revoke Article 50 and cancel the Brexit process entirely without having a confirmatory referendum. What a shameful and dishonourable view for a party that was founded on the principles of democracy and respect. Having said that, I must concede that Councillor Hodson, who unfortunately can't be here with us today, gave an impassioned, some might say gladiatorial speech at his party conference earlier this week, cautioning against this commitment. Instead, Councillor Hodson advocated for a slightly less extreme, though still anti-democratic, second referendum. If I may say, Councillor Hodson is making progress of a kind on the Brexit issue, and one hopes that before long he will actually be willing to accept the voice of the British people. But for a moment, allow me to bring this issue to home for councillors. We members sitting here today have a unique insight into the shifting sands of political opinion and public mood. We can see how the spectre of uncertainty is leading to nothing more than division and anger. Our domestic agenda is being shunted in favour of argument, delay and collective frustration. We have a chance as people who have experienced first-hand the desire for politicians in Westminster to just get on with it, to say to lawmakers that we are fed up with attempts to thwart this process, fed up with political games and fed up with efforts to ignore the democratic will. If you will indulge me, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to leave colleagues with a thought to ponder as this debate rumbles on. Let us not run away with notions that we know best, that we're in some way superior to those who have returned us to this place. To paraphrase my old school motto, timor populi principium sapientiae, the fear of the people is the beginning of wisdom. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. I understand that the leader wishes to move an amendment. Could you please read it out?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the amendment reads as following. We would like to add a full stop at the end of 2016, and then we would like to insert a new paragraph. Furthermore, the Council acknowledges that both the Conservative and Labour parties gave a commitment to the British public at the 2017 general election to leave the EU with a deal. We then delete the words "and calls" and replace these with "we therefore call," and after EU add the words "with a deal." So therefore the amended motion reads as follows, Mr. Mayor. This Council acknowledges that Sunderland voted to leave the European Union in 2016. Furthermore, the Council acknowledges that both the Conservative and Labour parties gave a commitment to the British public at the 2017 general election to leave the EU with a deal. We therefore call upon our city's 3 MPs to honour both of these results by facilitating the UK's exit from the EU with a deal. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson, do you wish to second the amendment?
I second the amendment, Mr. Mayor, and reserve the right to speak.
Leader, will you speak to the motion, please?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. As I spoke with Councillor Oliver yesterday about notices of motions and not notices of motions, because notices of motions are really meant to be about direct elements this council can do to deliver a better outcome for the residents of the city. I do not believe that this is a notice of motion. I believe this is a political statement, expecting to have been in a general election period at this moment, and it would have been a clear attack on the Labour Party's 3 members of Parliament in the Sunderland at that time. I do have to say that I think that our 3 Labour MPs would be delighted to be given the power and authority for 3 of them to facilitate the EU deal. You know, 650 MPs have found it impossible over the last 3.5 years, and I do have to gently point out to my colleagues on the opposite side of the chamber that 300 Tory MPs haven't delivered Brexit. David Cameron in 2015 caused this problem, Theresa May in 2017 made it worse, and Boris Johnson has now just turned it into a car crash. So the problem sits entirely with your party, ladies and gentlemen, and your party is denying democracy. The ERG is denying democracy. People within your party have stopped Theresa May's deal going through on 3 occasions. It has absolutely nothing to do with Labour Party members of Parliament denying the deal. Labour has supported several deals, and Conservative MPs have shot it down every single time. So that is the real truth behind the notice of motion. Now, I had a quick look, because it's not yet been consigned to the bin of history, but it'll probably be there soon, at Forward Together. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's Theresa May's 85-page manifesto for the Conservative Party in 2017 for the election. And it's a rip-roaring cartoon of a ride, I have to tell you. As I've said, Mr Mayor, in 2017, both Labour and Conservative parties campaigned on pledges to honour the 2016 referendum and deliver Brexit with a deal. Labour was possibly more explicit in this commitment, but the Conservative manifesto was littered with commitments to this approach. Page 5, the forward by Theresa May, it's all about how we will have economic security going forward. Page 6, number 2 of 5, giant challenges. We need to deliver a smooth and orderly departure from the EU and forge a deal and special relationship with our friends and allies across Europe. Page 8, we believe in the good that government can do. If we are going to make sure Britain emerges from Brexit as a strong and united nation, we will need strong leadership and good government to get us the right deal for Britain with Europe. Page 14, a strong economy that works for everyone. In the first paragraph of that diatribe is just all about a commitment to leaving the EU with a deal. Page 15, increasing trade. Britain has always been a great trading nation. Trade will continue to be crucial to our future growth and prosperity. As we leave the EU, we want to negotiate a new, deep and special relationship with the EU that will allow free trade between the UK and the EU member states. We will seek to replicate all existing EU free trade agreements and support the ratification of trade agreements already entered into during our EU membership. Ladies and gentlemen, what went wrong? What went exactly? Boris Johnson and the ERG and the far right within the Conservative Party is what went wrong. Right? This was going to be the easiest thing in the world. We were going to leave. It was going to be mum's apple pie. We were going to be easily in a position to have a brilliant deal by now. The EU would bend over backwards to enable us because they would be more worried about it than we were. All rubbish. This was a desperate attempt by Cameron, who was terrified that Nigel Farage and the UKIP were about to take over the Tory party in 2015, and that's why a referendum was promised. and then he didn't do the work to deliver it. And we are now where we are, which is we have to deliver Brexit, because that is ultimately what the people in 2016 asked for. All 85 pages of Theresa May's Forward Together manifesto is littered with references and commitments to Brexit with a deal. So I think it's incredibly rich, Councillor, that you think that you can blame 3 Labour MPs for where we are with the Brexit fiasco when the Tory party is entirely at fault for that position. This is what the Labour Party has always been about. We have committed continually to leaving with a deal. Our commitment has always been about securing the economy and jobs and workers' rights, and none of that has changed, though the Tory party position has fluttered around from one extreme to another. Right? The fact that you kicked out 21 moderate One Nation Conservatives because they were an inconvenient truth to the drift to the far right within your party on this position is a true example of where you are and what sort of scrutiny your party needs to be put under going forward. My MPs, your MPs, cannot facilitate Brexit without the support of 647 others. They just cannot do it. They are in opposition. And as an opposition, boy, have we held your party's feet to the fire on this. I can't think of a leader anywhere in the world who's come in, and I'm talking about Bojo here, and the current score is Prime Minister 0, Parliament 6. And this is why he prorogued Parliament, because he did not want Parliament taking him to account and scrutinising what he was doing, because he's in hock to the far right and to business commitments who do not want to be in the EU when their transparency rules come in about hedge funds, offshore money, and that all comes in 2020. And that's the real reason behind the Jacob Rees-Moggs of this world being so against. So we're now living with an unelected Prime Minister again, with a government that's currently sitting with a majority of -43. Honestly, it's like we're living in an episode of The Thick of It. Really, I expect Malcolm Tucker to come round that corner at any minute and start swearing at people. And the Tory party is so focused on its own survival. And that's all this is about. They're now terrified once again of Farage again, because he's now the Brexit party, that the Tories are desperately trying to out-Brexit the Brexit party on this and become the new Brexit party that all focus on governance, which is what they're meant to be there about what they're meant to be doing to look after the people and the will of the British people. And a deal, I have got no doubt, would have been done. A deal should have been done, and a deal must be done to protect our economy and jobs. If Theresa May had not spent 2 years, over 3 years, not talking to the opposition parties, all she did was talk to herself and be bullied by the 40 ERG members and ran out of time. So I will support clearly the amendment of this motion, because I think it is important that the will of the people, and we have to remember we're all Democrats at the end of the day, we must be seen to be ensuring that Parliament works towards getting that deal and leaving Brexit. We must do that. So the intent of the notice of motion is fair. The political and the politicisation of it by Councillor Doyle is clearly not fair, and there will not be a general election this month or next month. Your statement's a little bit early, because you thought Boris would manage to con Parliament into calling an early general election. And Parliament was never going to be that foolish, because once it had been called, he could then change the date of it. Because the Prime Minister can change the date of the election at any stage. And lo and behold, an election scheduled for the 14th, 15th, 16th, 20th of October, whenever, would have become the 1st of November. the day after he crashed us out of the EU without a deal. And I think that would be a terrible outcome.
Mr Mayor, move amendment.
I'm just about finished, Mr Mayor.
Extension.
I do apologise for slightly overrunning. So, support the amendment, please, because we do need to remember that we're all Democrats. Ignore the far right across there try to politicise it and only have a go at Labour MPs when the people that are the real problem here are Tory MPs who blocked every deal that has gone to Parliament to take us out of the EU with a deal. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Leader. Does anyone else wish to speak to the amendment, please? Please raise your hands.
Councillor Knight, Councillor Francis, Councillor Ward, Councillor Walker, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Oliver, Councillor Mann. Mr Mayor, if I just read the list of speakers, we have
You can put your mic on, please.
Apologies, Mr Mayor. The list of speakers is Councillor N McKnight, Francis, Wood, Walker, Wilson, Kelly, Oliver, Mann, and Councillor Johnston has reserved the right to speak.
Councillor Neil McKnight, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Democracy indeed. Okay. As you know, I've spent my entire career, 30 years, in and around the NHS, both in clinical and in managerial roles. The first principle of my professional code of conduct, to which I am professionally bound, states, make the care and safety of patients my first concern and act to protect them from risk. As the recently published Yellowhammer report has shown, incidentally, I don't know whether you know, but Yellowhammer is an anagram of Orwell Mayhem. Whatever civil servant dreamt that need to mention in the honours list, to be quite frank, which was published against the wishes of the Tory government. Cast your mind back, our wonderful Prime Minister didn't want to publish this and fought it. We had to get a humble petition to the Queen to have this released to Parliament. So, against the wishes of the Tory government, and no deal or disorderly Brexit will pose a severe risk to the medicine supply chain and providers of social care. That's in Yellowhammer. I personally state here and now that I am not prepared under any circumstances to compel any MP, be they Labour, Tory, Liberal, Independent, whatever, to vote for something that will compromise my professional responsibilities and put patients at risk. I'd also like to give a little bit of a history lesson as well. We mentioned about history over there. The members opposite may do well to remind themselves of one of the final speeches made as a Prime Minister by Sir Winston Churchill about 2 days before he retired in 1955. And he said, "The first duty of a Member of Parliament is to do what he thinks in his faithful and disinterested judgment is right and necessary for the honour and safety of Great Britain. His second duty is to his constituents, of whom he is the representative, but not the delegate." Burke's famous declaration on this subject is well known. It is only in the third place that his duty to the party organisation or programme takes rank. All of these three loyalties should be observed, but there is no doubt of the order in which they stand under any healthy manifestation of democracy. Read and learn. Those words, safety of Great Britain. Or to put it another way, MPs are required to act in a manner that they personally consider to be in the best interest of this country, ahead of the wishes of the electorate. They have the responsibility of using their judgment as a representative, not being directed as a delegate. We do not have direct democracy in this country. It is a representative democracy. Again, learn. All the main players in the Leave campaign never raised the issue of a no deal nor did they disclose that leaving could represent a risk to the vulnerable and ill in our society. Farage, who was described recently as the tapeworm of British politics looking for another host, by Carol Cadwallen if you're interested, wanted a Norway-style agreement. David Davis stated that a deal would be the easiest in history. Johnson is quoted as saying the EU would be begging us for a deal. Yet, none of this has come to pass. As the Yellowhammer report has shown, the Brexit at all costs approach will have disastrous consequences. Hence, Parliament has acted in a manner ascribed by your hero Churchill by outlawing no deal. I appreciate and respect that the majority in the city voted leave in the 2016 referendum for a multitude of reasons and were and are genuine in their reasons for doing so. I do not subscribe to the view that one side was right and one side wrong on this issue. The motion laid out by the Tories this afternoon, however, is nothing more than a political stunt flying in the face of the reasoning of one of their heroes. I'm happy to support the amended motion in that we must make every effort to find a mutually workable agreement with our European allies in order to leave the EU in an orderly fashion. There is a darker motive at play, I fear, colleagues. The party opposite Mr Mayor, with this cheap stunt of emotion, is pandering to the extreme right in this city. Really? Listen and learn. The community that listen and learn. Let me speak. The community that inhibits the dark outer reaches of social media and peddles lies and abuse to anybody who disagrees with that perverted agenda. We've seen your comments in interviews with these extremists. We've seen them. We've seen them up in the gallery. We know. We've even had you tabling their conspiracy theory nonsense in councillors' questions in this chamber. Let me tell you what you're fueling with this hard and fast dalliance with these people. We've had female Labour councillors exposed to levels of misogyny and outrageous false smears that would result in dismissal from any other place of work. Pictures of handguns posted on social media stating this is what should happen to all Labour councillors. A female candidate physically assaulted in a pub by a yob. A male candidate exposed to homophobic abuse recently, and 4 Labour councillors receiving death threats. Let that sink in. Death threats.
Mr Mayor, could I ask for a point of personal explanation on behalf of the Conservative group, please?
No. Point of the council constitution.
Point of personal. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'm extremely disturbed indeed by the allegations that Councillor McKnight is making, which quite frankly I think could be ones of a legal nature. Could I say to him, if he has any evidence that any member of the Conservative group is any way linked to the far right in any illegal activity, then he makes an immediate report to the Northumbria Police.
Councillor McKnight, can you continue?
Can you be careful? Look on social media, you'll see it.
Can you be careful with what you say, please?
I personally don't use social media to any great degree, but my colleagues and my family do. With regards to myself, they've had to witness these moronic specimens informing that I, personally, am using council taxpayers' money to pay immigrants to rape our women in Roper Avenue, laughing all the while they are doing it. Telling them I am corrupt scum. I've actually removed the profane and expletives from that. I am a risk to children. And to cap it all, on these sites that you contribute to and comment on, because I've seen them, and my wife's picture superimposed on a pornographic image. This is what you're fueling with this political stunt. That's what you're fueling with these people. You should be ashamed of yourselves. I really suggest that you Google some of the names of the prolific people who post on these contributions. You might find it very illuminating. Mr Mayor, I'm sick to death of Brexit. I've had it in my back teeth. Fed up with it. The people of this country have been a victim of a Tory con trick, with the issue of leaving the EU being used as a convenient squirrel to distract from the greatest political heist in history, austerity. Our public services have been plundered, the NHS starved of resources, and police officers cut to dangerously low levels. The poor and disabled being sanctioned under universal credit, families in the coalfields are forced to use food banks, with schools increasingly being relied upon to provide clothing and nourishment for children amidst the decimation of school budgets. All the while, their pals, the rich, keep on getting richer at our expense. As I've stated, Mr Mayor, I fully respect the views of most people that voted leave. I will not, however, compel our MPs to act in a manner that restricts their ability to ensure that a departure from the EU will not adversely affect the safety of patients or produce adverse consequences for the wider country. In the event of any patients or health services being affected as a no-deal Brexit, I personally will return to this chamber and hold anyone to account that demanded such an outcome. This, Mr Mayor, is a mess and mischief of Tory making. They own it. They are the government in power, therefore they must resolve it. To simply deflect the responsibility on opposition MPs is disingenuous and poor politics, to say the least. I suspect, however, that the most breathtakingly inept and arrogant Prime Minister in history, a man patently unable to identify a press corps on a hospital ward from 20 paces, has the wherewithal to do so. I support the amended motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Francis.
Mr Mayor, I was going to deal in a slightly light-hearted way with this. But I want to make one thing clear to the last speaker. I believe that Facebook and similar media are truly diabolical in nature. And I really do take exception to what you said, because you were looking at me and my colleagues. I don't know what they're going to say to you. But I make the point again that Facebook and such media are diabolical. They have caused the deaths of people, and I have nothing whatsoever to do with them. I believe that the MPs should support the majority who voted in the referendum. However, I voted to remain. I am still a Remainer, and I cannot support leaving the EU without a deal, a very good deal for the UK. What shape that takes, I leave to more people with more political nous than myself and a greater understanding of civil law. My understanding right on the back of a postage stamp. I said I'd change, I was going to be serious. Here are 3 short anecdotes which I've collected over the decades about the referendum, and it sets the referendum in the context of voters of the UK. I'm sure that the name Anthony Wedgwood Benn is well known to all of us here. Back in, I think it was the 70s, when we were voting either to go into the EEC or not to go in, the BBC set up a programme that may have been set up in the Houses of Parliament itself, I can't remember. But there were 2 groups of MPs. Those that wanted to vote yes, to go into the EU, we'll call it that, and those who wanted to vote no. They were a mixed group. Labour, Conservative, and maybe Liberal in one group and the same in the other group. I had a lot of time for Anthony Wedgwood Benn because he had his head screwed on. You can see 3 steps ahead of anybody else. Wedgwood Ben said that he would not join in that debate because if people saw him sitting with Conservatives, they might think he had transferred to the Conservative Party. Now think about that. Think about the seriousness of what he was saying about the voter. Coming forward to April 2016, when I was seeking re-election, I was walking through Fulwell and a gentleman stopped me, and I'll try to quote what he said verbatim. He said to me, "Why have you MPs got a referendum vote, but the ordinary elector has not?" Think about that. And finally, come forward to September 2019, on the night of provocation. MPs from all parties said in the House, the electorate will not understand what is happening tonight. I certainly didn't understand the ins and outs of much of it. But think about those three statements and how people view all of this. So why do I want to remain? Western Europe has been at peace since 1945, 75 years. It's the longest period of peace since Caesar hammered Vercingetorix at the siege of Alesia in about 60 BC. I studied my Latin as well, Crescat Sapienta and all of that. Yes, it's a school of Latin. So I missed that one. Was it a good one? No. Not that all, I just look at it. The kernel of EU philosophy is peace. Peace and prosperity. It's far more important than any nationalism. And you've only got to look at National Socialism in Germany before the war and during the war to know what that can bring. 20th century European wars developed into world wars, and World War II cost 50 million lives, which was the population of the UK when I was born. Treaties between 2 or 3 countries can and do lead to war. UK and Poland being a case in point in 1939. Fortunately, we have NATO, which is an outward-looking military organisation, and by Harry, we need it with the way Russia's shaping up. Trade treaties, a parliament where people can, and I quote Churchill, where people can jaw rather than war, bring peace, lasting peace. I mentioned I was born during the war. I was raised during the morphing of the Empire into the British Commonwealth, now referred to quite rightly as the Commonwealth, an organisation for peace through cooperation and trade. And turning in detail to the EU, do I want the French president trying to impose his ideas on us? No. You can have it in Latin, you can have it in French, you can have it in Gaelic, you can have it in German, what do you want? Great language, English. Do I want the German Chancellor lecturing us on economics? 9. Here's one for you though. Do I want the Irish Taoiseach lecturing us about borders? Yes. Chan Neil, which is Gaelic for no.
Yes.
Well, you might want him lecturing us about borders. I don't want.
Irish. It's important to me.
I don't want bombs in Londonderry again. But do I want Trump, who thinks he's the reincarnation of J.R. Ewing, squeezing our economy with the God Almighty dollar? Nah, that's my best American. Do I want the National Socialist Putin threatening us with from the Baltic and across the polar oceans? Yet. That's the end of the foreign languages, folks. I believe that Europe is our future. It's our peace and hence our prosperity. So how do I square the circle? The majority of Sunderland people who voted did so to leave. If the referendum is binding rather than advisory, our MPs have little choice other than to vote the way we suggest. But we must only leave the EU with the very best deal that the UK can engineer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Francis. Councillor Peterwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I begin by complimenting my colleague, Councillor Doyle, upon the speech that he made, which opened this debate. It's the first of his major speeches in Council. It was an excellent speech. The content was good. He conceded that not every member of this group might agree with every word that he said. But I look forward to hearing a lot more from Councillor Doyle in this Council chamber in future years. I really wanted to say that, Mr. Mayor. I thought it was important. The leader of the council might be surprised at the extent to which he will have managed to unite the Conservative group in the council chamber this afternoon. But that will become apparent, I think, during the course of the rest of this debate. Can I pick up a part of Councillor McKnight's speech, the more considered part, Mr. Mayor? He made a point about MPs being representatives and not delegates, and I entirely accept that point. Councillors are representatives and not delegates, Mr. Mayor. He effectively didn't use the words of Edmund Burke in his famous dictum about owing our voters the exercise of our judgment, and if we don't do that in making decisions, we betray them rather than serve them fully. But he talked about delegates and representatives, making the point how important it was, how much better representatives were than delegates. It's interesting, I think, Mr. Mayor, that whilst at the Conservative conference you're a representative, at the Labour and trade union conferences you're delegates.
Not everyone.
Ah. People I'm pleased we have the odd exception, Mr. Mayor. That's good, that's great. People certainly, and it's been acknowledged in the council chamber already this afternoon, are very frustrated that the result of the referendum 3.5 years ago has not yet been delivered. And yet MPs, including the city's 3 MPs, have 3 times had the opportunity to support a negotiated deal which would have allowed for a smooth and orderly exit from the EU. And 3 times they've said no. Now that 2016 referendum, in my view, gave a mandate for Brexit. Remainers might, like me, accept that democratic decision. I remember during the campaign for the referendum sharing a platform with the then chairman of the Wearside Liberals, who was in the chamber this afternoon, both supporting a Remain vote. I haven't particularly changed my mind, but I do accept the democratic decision of the people. There is loser's consent, if I can use the phrase, for a negotiated Brexit that comes with a deal. And the failure of MPs so far to vote through a deal has merely helped to increase the clamour from those who would leave with no deal or leave, in fact, at any price. Parliament has outlawed now a no-deal Brexit, and it's now incumbent upon MPs to vote for a negotiated deal, and indeed it will be hypocritical for them not to. But it's a bit rich, I think, of Councillor Miller to attack Conservative MPs for not agreeing a deal when 90% of them have actually voted for that, including the present Prime Minister. What percentage? Never mind, he still voted in favour. How many times have Julie, Bridget and Sharon voted for a deal, Mr. Mayor? Not once, as far as I'm aware. What percentage of Labour MPs have actually voted for a deal so far? Is it even 1%? 1%? Yes, perhaps about 1%. Where Councillor Miller is right is to point to the dangers of a no deal. There is no mandate, in my view, for a no deal in the country. There is no majority in the country for a no deal, as elections and opinion polls show, and there is certainly no loser's consent, as there is for a negotiated deal. Both major parties, as Councillor Miller reminded us, fought the 2017 general election on a manifesto promising a smooth and orderly exit from the EU. And Michael Gove, in March, actually made the following statement: "We didn't vote to leave without a deal. That wasn't the message of the campaign I helped lead." Now, I don't see the point, really, Mr. Mayor, of advocating no deal, because there must be a deal with the EU at some point. And it seems to me better to have that deal before we leave, to avoid the pain of leaving without a deal. We do have to resolve at some point how much money we owe if we leave the EU. We do have to resolve Northern Irish border issues, and we do surely need to agree a tariff-free deal with our partners in Europe. No deal, in other words, Mr. Mayor, would be very damaging, and it's argued that areas such as the North East would actually suffer most if we left without a deal.
Absolutely correct.
It would mean tariffs on goods, for example. Tariffs on goods mean higher prices. Higher prices mean fewer goods sold. Fewer goods sold mean less produced. Fewer produced mean fewer jobs, and fewer jobs mean lower living standards. And I wasn't elected to represent the voters of St Michael's to be a party in any way to delivering any of those things. This government's Yellow Hammer report, published just last month, shows also there will be some disruption, and reference has been made to that report already in the debate. There will be border delays, possible food and medicine shortages. What we can't know beforehand, Mr. Mayor, is the precise extent of that disruption, and frankly, I'd rather not find out. I expect MPs will have another opportunity to agree a deal to leave the EU before the 31st of October. And I think it's in the interests of their constituents and democracy that they take it. And I hope that Bridget, Julie and Sharon, amongst all the other 600 plus MPs, are listening to that message, Mr. Miller. I'm happy to support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor Dr. Geoffrey Walker.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to do a bit of a Bob Francis here. I mean, obviously, I can't do the style of delivery because that would be difficult indeed. I'm not an impressionist, unfortunately. But, I'm going to relate how I think that the ruling class that are now occupying the front benches of Parliament are not fit to deliver any kind of deal on behalf of the people of Britain, simply because they serve their own slavish interests and not the interests of the people of Britain. I was an undergraduate at Oxford, and like Johnson and Rees-Mogg and Cameron and others, I went to Balliol College and I studied politics, philosophy and NE. Not economics, because you don't study economics when you go to Oxford. Everybody knows that. George Osborne proved you don't know anything about economics when you go to Oxford. Economists go to Cambridge. All the economists are in Cambridge. They're not in Oxford. I had the privilege of watching the ruling classes at play during those days. I say a privilege, but it wasn't a pretty sight. Not a pretty sight at all. You had to go to a place called the Oxford Union to watch them at play, because they didn't go to lectures, they didn't go to tutorials. In fact, the vast majority of them didn't even go to the final exams in the examination schools, and they still managed to graduate. I think you should speak to the college bursar of the various colleges to find out how that happened.
Now, I'm not making that accusation of Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg. Perhaps they did graduate in a correct manner. I haven't seen any photographs of them throwing their mortarboards up in the air after coming out of the examination schools, but perhaps these pictures do exist. I have seen pictures of Boris Johnson burning a £50 note in front of a beggar in Oxford. I have seen that scene. Now, the ruling class is at play, an interesting phenomenon in the Oxford Union. Every night, a silver service dinner in the dining room. Every night, £200 bottles of port. Lots of them. Lots and lots of them. Very, very drunk. Got very, very drunk. Went into the debating chamber and lay very much in the reclining position that Jacob Rees-Mogg lay in the House of Commons, if not sometimes flat out, so drunk that they had to be excused and carried out by the security of the Oxford Union, who were the Bulldogs. Yeah, they got carried out. Now, the significance of this is these people see the working class, described by me, by one of them in the Oxford Union, as a bunch of snivelling toads. Now, we are snivelling toads, according to the ruling class, who staged this coup in Parliament, because they haven't been elected. They've come to the front benches by stealing the position that they're in and commanding it away from other people in their own party. But we snivelling toads are people who, if you give them a little bit, they want more. And if you give them a little bit more, they still complain. Just a bunch of snivelling toads we are. So how can you expect these people from the British ruling class in Parliament, such as Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, to deliver an effective deal to the people of not only the North East, but of Britain also? Because they are self-serving, they are self-interested. They are only interested in what they can get out of things, not what they put into it. The awful thing about it is they end up role-playing in Parliament, like Jacob Rees-Mogg standing at a dispatch box and quoting Latin at one stage. How false is that? Right? I did Latin I went to grammar school as well as Oxford. My God, I must be so privileged. So I did Latin as well, but it was only O-level. So, you know, no desperandum and all that. But yeah, I think when the role-playing as representatives of the people, as statesman-like figures, they are not statesman-like figures at all. Because, Mr. Mayor, you can shave the hairs off a gooseberry, it might look like a grape, but it's inorganically incapable of becoming a grape. I support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Denny Wilson.
Full of that. I sometimes went to school, as will become apparent. It hasn't been mentioned here, but I really admire our three MPs. These are three strong women putting their whole career on the line to look after the people of Sunderland, to get the very best deal they can get for our industry. They could quite easily cave in, but they're not. They're standing there fighting for the best deal for the people of Sunderland. I'm really going to try not to get off it there, right? But you're just sitting there, we've been talking about school uniforms and the poverty and the misery what the Tory party and Hazelot put on austerity. And you can sit there and it just bounces off you, doesn't affect you. Something that's never been mentioned yesterday or today, and Karen knows a lot about, is PIP. I went with a lad, what years brought in, PIP. A lad who was dying, took him to the door because they said he was fit for work. And I want this in the echo. The people at Southwick Door were magnificent. They said, what are you doing here? You're dying? He says, I know, but the sign's up. They sent him home, we'll sort it out. So there is decent people in the world. Some of the leaders said, this is the bottom line of Brexit. You're on about a deal? There is a deal. It's a no deal. Because who benefits? The leader alluded to it a little bit earlier. In January, the EU are closing all the loopholes on tax evasion, right? I don't know if Boris Johnson got one, but Nigel Farage has, And so the man behind them, Aaron Banks, owns an offshore bank. Rees-Mogg has got them all over the world, Cayman Islands, Singapore and everywhere. Now what do we rely on, most of us in Sunderland? People paying the taxes so they can get the old age pensions, so they can get the hospitals paid, the NHS. These are avoiding tax. So what you're saying is, yes, look, that our 3 MPs, we cannot trust them, but we can trust 3 millionaires who are tax avoiders. Didn't think so.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor John Kelly, did you?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, there's been probably more common sense spoken in this chamber than there has been in the Houses of Commons for absolutely months. I was a Brexiteer. I want to leave Europe because I don't agree with the bureaucracy, the unelected personnel that can go into a back room and come out with a deal. That's what I objected to. On the night of the Brexit result, I did not stop being a European. I am still a European. I have no problem with people coming to this country to work. God, our NHS wouldn't survive without our colleagues from Europe coming across and manning those posts. I've sat and I've watched so much of the Brexit debate for years on end. And I'm just going to pick up on a point that Councillor Wood said. And why didn't our MPs support the motion, the deal that Theresa May brought back? The deal that Theresa May brought back was a very light touch deal, but what people didn't look at was the political statement thereafter. The removal of workers' rights, the removal of safeguards, the attack on the European Court of Human Rights, and the fact that we would be pushed further down the ladder yet again. We've spent our entire lives, and I watched the debate and I've watched a lot of it, and I've done a bit of research, done a bit of checking on the different bits and pieces. On the campaign trail, and I was never influenced by the campaign trail, because when Boris Johnson and Michael Gove were there, you're not alive. You know, and anybody who didn't know that was a lie, are obviously deluding themselves. The thing I got that's sticking in my throat at the moment is, we want to return power to our Parliament. We want to return it that much, we've suspended it. That's how much our Conservative colleagues on that bus wanted to return power. Mr Mayor, I would seriously suggest that maybe as a group of councillors from Sunderland go down, has a conversation with the Conservatives and try and sort it out for them, because they're incapable. This was created by Mr Cameron, who again has been said was pandering because he was cleaning this up, was very scared of Nigel Farage. He did not expect a Leave vote. He says it, and he's called Mr Johnson some fantastic names over the last few years. Then, upon the Leave vote, he ran like a coward from the scene. He did not give one tot about anybody who would have to pay the price. He just got out of there. He's wealthy enough, he didn't need his job, so he was fine. He got out. We then had a Conservative Prime Minister, Theresa May. Basically, it was a done deal. She was not really elected by the public at that point. She was put in, and then she goes for a walk on holiday and she decides, do you know where it is? I've got them on the run. We've blackened Corbyn's name, we've blackened the Labour Party's name, we've blackened everybody's name. I'll walk a general election. Mr Corbyn unfortunately proved her wrong, and we ended up with a hung Parliament. I think where we're at now, Boris Johnson, what a joke. The man's an imbecile. The man is an embarrassment. To say that he is a politician from this country really, really is embarrassing. I support this amendment because I do believe we need a deal. I do believe, even as Brexiteer, we need a deal, because there are jobs at Nissan relying on that deal. There are hospital supplies relying on that deal. There is food supplies relying on a deal. And whilst I have the Irish name, and unlike Councillor O'Brien, I don't claim to be Irish.
I have an Irish passport.
We'll have to check and see if he's allowed us in this chamber. I just cannot, and I've known lots of lads who've served in Northern Ireland, and all of the deaths and the trauma and the horrendous activity that took place ahead of the Good Friday Agreement will be wrecked if we do not get a sensible deal. And I, for one, do not want to see young soldiers going off to Northern Ireland. I do not want to see members of the public in Northern Ireland killed by bombs and bullets and all the rest of it. We've been there. That should be consigned to history. A deal will help us consign that to history, so we need to do that. Mr. Mayor, I've looked around and Councillor Wood speaks passionately as always. Councillor Francis again speaks passionately, and opposite ends of the argument, some Brexiteers, some Remainers. We have to acknowledge the result of the referendum. That is a must. But at no point during that entire referendum campaign did anybody from either side put on the table that there was a prospect that we would not get a deal with the EU, and that would never ever happen because it was going to be the easiest thing in the world. The EU would be begging us for it and all of it. I'm sorry we got that so badly wrong. I will support this amendment to this notice of motion, primarily because the people of Sunderland have voted. I am here to represent their views, and their views were, we voted to leave, and I will support that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Robert Oliver.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to make some brief comments really on the issue of referendums. And of course, first of all, congratulations to Councillor Doyle on his very good proposal of the original motion. And I must say I enjoyed Councillor Walker's speech. It did seem more amusing than Brideshead Revisited, if I may say. Mr. Mayor, I agree with many speakers, Councillor Wood, Councillor Kelly and others, that the referendum result must be respected. And I think whilst the likes of Councillor Miller say that, I think they play fast and loose with it.
That's terrible, Robert. Terrible.
The idea that the 3 MPs in this city respect the referendum result, I think, is rather fanciful. Since day one, they have been campaigning to stop Brexit. And when we say second referendum, what does that mean? It means stop Brexit. Now, partly, I have some respect for them. If that's what they really believe, if that's what they really think is best for the city, then I think they're wrong to do it because it was a referendum, but I respect the fact that they are doing it in good faith. But I do think that they are wrong because it was a referendum. Referendum, direct democracy, the people make the decision. Councillor McKnight, when he wasn't making disgraceful allegations against members of this group being linked with far-right people, and he's very lucky he's got parliamentary privilege when he said it, he talked about Winston Churchill, but Winston Churchill wasn't living in an era of referendums. We didn't have referendums when Winston Churchill was a member of Parliament. But we did have referendums from 1998 onwards. The Labour government established the principle of mixing direct democracy and representative democracy and having frequent referendums on constitutional matters. So it was absolutely no surprise whatsoever to have a referendum on the EU, especially when under a Labour government in 1975, we'd have a referendum on the EU. So to be quite honest, and I'm looking forward to getting home because I've got David Cameron's memoirs arriving today on the first day of their publication. So he was doing something that was absolutely in line with history. We've also accepted that referendums, whilst legally they might not be binding, they are advisory, that the convention is we accept them all. So the Labour Party accepted the result of the North East Assembly referendum when it said no to their policy. They didn't turn around and say, you voted no, but we think yes, therefore it's yes. And I do feel that the members of Parliament have done that. What especially irritates me is the idea that they're putting around that people of Sunderland have changed their minds. Sharon Hodgson produced a survey and said, this survey proves that the people of Sunderland have changed their minds. In the referendum, we could all vote. How many people voted in Sharon's survey? It came out as less than 1%. 1%. What an utter joke. There is no evidence that the people of Sunderland have changed their minds, and the only legitimate way in which they could change their mind would be a second referendum, which I don't support. The last point I wanted to make is the point that Councillor Wilson brought up, that somehow there's some sort of conspiracy behind it. I'm surprised he didn't bring up, I don't know, Bilderberg or the Elders of Zion or something like that. But this farcical idea that it's somehow because we're bringing rules on tax, I presume you meant tax avoidance, and because of that, we're hurrying to get out so that Jacob Rees-Mogg can stitch up his trust fund in the Cayman Islands. The Conservative government has done more to close down these loopholes than any other government, and a lot of them were set up under the Labour Party. It was Peter Mandelson who said, we're intensely relaxed about the filthy rich. And then they allowed all these things. They allowed people to put their money offshore. They had 13 years and they didn't close these down. And the Conservative government has, since the financial crisis, made great steps in closing down a lot of the loopholes that allow people to move their money offshore. I mean, why are these companies like Starbucks and Google and Amazon now being pushed into paying their fair share of tax? Didn't happen under the Labour government. So to turn around and say, oh, well, it's just because you're wanting to keep the money and you're rich and privileged, quite frankly, is farcical. The reason for Brexit is that 62% of people suddenly voted for it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mann?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to firstly say that I've stood in these chambers for just over 4 months now, and quite frankly, I'm astounded, Mr. Mayor, at some of the behaviour from some of the councillors and the accusations flying backwards and forwards that have absolutely nothing to do with the point of motion, challenges about Facebook accounts and bullying, and why doesn't this chamber just keep it to what the motion is? And thank you for that. I must say, in answer to Councillor McKnight, that I've been called names as well. I've been called a fascist. I've been called a Nazi. I've been called a xenophobe. I've been called a racist. I can quite assure you that I'm a woman from Sunderland, and I'm neither or none. In fact, Mr. Mayor, I am a coalfields girl. I'm from a long family of miners, all Labour, through and through. I was born in Hordern Colliery, and I was raised on the power of the vote. I was raised on democracy, and I was raised tough and strong, and that's how I got here. I got here through passion, pride, and democracy. I assume that you're all here for democracy, which leads me on to, of course, the UK's exit from the EU. In 2000, I'm not going to speak as eloquently as some of you, but I will speak passionately. In 2016, the Labour Party campaigned to remain in the European Union. By a majority of over 60%, the voters of Sunderland rejected Labour's campaign and clearly voted in the referendum to leave the EU. This was a very brave decision in the face of what proved to be fake threats to employment, house prices and living standards made by the Remain campaign. In fact, it was an astounding result in Sunderland, given that as part of Project Fear at the time, it was claimed that Nissan were likely to leave Sunderland if we voted to leave the EU. Well, they haven't. In the 2017 general election, the Labour Party took note of the desire in Labour constituencies to leave, and in order to ensure that they would be elected, they campaigned on a Respect the Referendum manifesto. All over the country, including Sunderland, they fooled their Labour supporters into voting for them because of this promise, respect the referendum. Simple. That's what happened. Labour even went so far as to support the eventual issuing of the Article 50 notice required under EU law, that's EU law, to give 2 years' notice of leaving the EU. We should have been gone in March. It should have happened. These were 2 years in which the EU were supposed to negotiate in good faith with the UK to enable the separation to go smoothly. However, the steady stream of Labour politicians from other parties, failed ex-politicians, all of these people travelling to Brussels backwards and forwards, talking, debating, arguing, actually undermined the EU belief that the UK was committed to leaving. It is our view that those meetings ensured that the EU became convinced that there was a real chance of overturning the referendum result. Therefore, there was no need to negotiate a good deal with the UK. This view was further reinforced by the manner in which Labour and other parties voted in Parliament, their media comments and the campaigns they mounted to overturn the referendum by delaying and frustrating any progress towards a deal in March 2019. And it's regrettable to say that 2 of Sunderland's MPs were particularly prominent in these campaigns against the will of their own voters. And I think that's the point. The percentage that Councillor Miller was saying, it could be 3 MPs of so many percent, fine. But our 3 MPs were from Sunderland MPs were not acting with the will of their constituents. They were particularly prominent in these campaigns. These same voters, they're not stupid, and they know when they've been duped. Their will was clearly displayed in the local elections of May this year. 26 seats were contested in Sunderland. Labour would normally expect to win all of them, or most. In fact, in a terrible night for Labour, they lost 10 seats, with the Conservatives gaining 4 wards, UKIP taking 3, the Lib Dems 2, and 1 to the Green Party. If not for the intervention of 2 small parties, UKIP may well have taken both Hetton and Houghton as well. The message to this council from Labour voters was clear. They felt cheated and taken for granted. They either decided to switch their votes or to not vote at all. On the same night, in Hetton Town Council, UKIP fielded 11 candidates and won 7 seats. Together with independent councillors, they can now form a majority on that town council. This is a very clear message to Labour politicians from usually committed Labour voters. Between 2014 and 2019, Labour have clearly been losing voters at a steady rate to the gain of UKIP. What is the message here and why? Your leader, Councillor Miller, read Labour's poor results correctly, and he pointed his finger directly at Sunderland's 3 MPs for their failure to honour their election promises to respect the referendum. My party believes that the first responsibility of every politician is to support democracy. We know for a fact, as do the people of Sunderland, that all 3 of our MPs have not delivered their promises and in Parliament vote against the will of their constituents. The people of our great city have told you loudly and clearly that they no longer trust the Labour Party, nor their MPs, which is why we are happy to give our full support to this Conservative motion. And furthermore, we strongly urge our MPs to respect the will of their constituents and UK democracy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Kevin Johnson, I believe you've got reserved the right to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find it hard to take lectures regarding Labour when it's actually a Conservative government who's been in power for the last 9 years, from UKIP, who wanted to repeal the Human Rights Act in 2015 and 17, yet you use that as a script last night. I mean, where to start with this Brexit? I mean, a complete and utter Conservative Party shambles from start to finish, and we're not even finished yet. The first with David Cameron, who after 6 years of a Conservative government thought he was going to get a Remain vote, especially in the North East, must have thought pigs were still flying. The second by Theresa May, who took 3 years of negotiations to bring a non-existent deal back to Parliament, which again we were all promised wouldn't be a problem through the Leave campaign. Unfortunately, we're more remembered for our dancing than we will be for our negotiation skills. And now third, Boris Johnson. I mean, we've already heard some remarks made tonight, and I particularly like the fact that we're complaining the President of Luxembourg had actually humiliated him and embarrassed him this week. Boris Johnson doesn't need any help with that. He's quite perfectly doing that on his own. Boris, the former mayor of a heavily Remain city who backed Leave for his own political career and had become Prime Minister, now the far right regard as their leader. And I really feel for Councillor Bob Francis tonight, and I respect his contribution to this debate, because had that been said in Parliament, he would have had the whip removed and he wouldn't be a Conservative fair councillor anymore. We do have a spread of division here in this country, and with the right-wing rhetoric and backing of the Cabinet, to say we're at war with the EU, quite frankly, is an insult to all those people who stood up and fought fascism in World War II and who lost their lives for this country. We've also heard the rise in hate crimes and threats made on social media, and how hate speech is now becoming more common. There is a real movement, and it's happening now. Shutting down Parliament, questioning and ignoring the rule of law, is a very, very dangerous direction to be moving in. And while the Conservative Party continue to play political games and position themselves for power and for their own careers, it's people and communities up and down this country who have suffered due to their reckless, unnecessary and cruel austerity agenda. Thrown in the middle of all that, we've had the divisive EU referendum that split families between Leave or Remain and only encouraged the rise in the far right in our streets and on social media. It seems it hasn't been enough to inflict ruin in services, cuts to welfare. They now want to go even further by forcing no-deal Brexit through that will only have catastrophic to jobs and livelihoods of the people of Sunderland. It won't be your laid-back Jacob Rees-Moggs, Michael Goves and Nigel Farage of this country who will feel the effects of that. It will be all of us and the people out there who will suffer the most. They don't care about the working class, they don't care about Sunderland, they never have and they never will. And no amount of right-wing propaganda, however skillfully put together, has the ability to maintain confidence in the long run. The Elhammer report stated low-income groups will be disproportionately affected by any price rises in food and fuel. People weren't promised this in the referendum in 2016. And where is Boris Johnson's £350 million to the NHS bus gone? He certainly wasn't travelling around Yorkshire in that last week when he was visiting people on the streets. What possible advantages are there, Councillor Doyle, in this city leaving without a deal? Sunderland is the UK's top exporting city, something we should be all extremely proud of and be championing. Leaving on Brexit Party commitment on WTO rules will surely have an impact on this and jobs in this city. Instead of coming forward with notices of motions like this, you should have been writing your own Conservative Prime Minister and request the funding that's needed, that's been taken away and had such an impact on people's lives up and down this country and in our communities, whilst apologising for decimating our public services and supporting the race to the bottom in our society. We've had the rise in antisocial behaviour, burglaries, motorbikes and quad bikes causing misery to residents, particularly my ward in Coptail, and an overstretched police force trying to cope with the loss of officers. It was mentioned earlier how you appeared on the front page of the Echo, and I don't know how you had the audacity to ask for more police after your government had already cut them from Northumbria Police since 2010. Mr Mayor, we have a divided country and we have divided communities that somehow need to be reunited. You can't just ignore one side of the argument or the other, in particular those who voted Leave, like the Lib Dems wanted to do, by just revoking Article 50 and ignoring their vote to leave the European Union. A general election or second referendum may provide a way forward to the deadlock and not only find a solution to this divisive Brexit issue that, let's be honest, I think everyone has quite had enough of by now. But there's no guarantees that anything would actually change and we could just be back in the same situation as we are in now. We need to somehow bring people together. This is something that we must achieve. And for me, there's only one way we can definitely make steps to achieve that, and that's an end to the grotesque rise of wealth inequality in this country and an end to austerity, investing in our education, our NHS, our police and all our public services, and support the most vulnerable in our society so they can move on with their lives. And we could be doing all of this now, regardless of whether we're in the European Union or not, because that's a decision made by the government of this country and the Conservatives who've been in power for the last 9 years, but they've chosen not to do that. Our ability to achieve that will only be greatly damaged if we leave without a deal. So we must ensure we secure a deal that protects the environment, investment, jobs, workers' rights, the rights of our British citizens living in Europe, and the rights of European citizens living and working here. I want our children to grow up in a tolerant society, in a strong, compassionate, outward-looking, engaging and prosperous United Kingdom. And hopefully, with a credible deal, we can finally make a start on that. And I would urge all members to support this motion and the amendment tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston. Councillor Doyle, you have the right to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think I really have much more to add other than to extend my thanks to Councillor Oliver, Councillor Wood, Councillor Francis, and indeed actually all councillors for their contributions this evening. I'm actually really pleased to see that Councillor Miller has been reading the Conservative Party manifesto so carefully. I think he would do quite well to do more of that, and I'd encourage that sort of literature to feature heavily on his bookshelf in the future. I will say, just quickly in relation to the speech from Councillor McKnight, I really do think that was a quite disgraceful remarks that you made. These people are not only my colleagues, but they're my friends, and I really don't think you should be bandying about those sort of accusations willy-nilly. So I just caution you against that, please. And actually, just one quick point as well, Councillor Wilson raised. I'm not quite sure how MPs who are wanting to push for a second referendum can be said to facilitating a deal. There's not much logic in that for me. I think if they really wanted to support a deal, they'd have voted for it like 92% of Conservative MPs did. But I'm pleased to say that I'm happy to support this amendment. The Conservative Party wants a deal. We're quite unequivocal on that. And yes, thank you, colleagues, for all contributing. Thank you.
Councillor Doyle. Can we now vote on the amendment, please?
Mr. Mayor, there are 45 votes in favour, no abstentions, no votes against, and therefore the amendment is carried.
I'll now read out the new substantive motion. This Council acknowledges that Sunderland voted to leave the European Union in 2016. Furthermore, this Council acknowledges that both the Conservative and Labour parties give a commitment to the British public at the 2017 general election to leave the EU with a deal. We therefore call upon the City's 3 MPs to honour both of those results by facilitating the UK's exit from the EU with a deal. Are there any further amendments or comments?
Mr. Mayor, we have an amendment. I believe we submitted it on Friday afternoon of last week.
If I'm right, you will need to move an amendment to the new substantive motion, which has just been agreed.
Can we do that now?
Yeah, I'll
Yeah, it's just been read out. Can we sorry? Can we just add in our point of recalling?
Can I ask you who's going to propose this?
I'm going to propose it.
And have you got a second for this?
Yes.
Okay. So can you? Right. So can you propose the motion and read it out, please? And you have to write it down for me as well.
Oh, I can do that. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Do you want to? Okay. Can we have a short adjournment to let Councillor O'Brien? Sorry. 15 minutes, okay?
Yeah.
Please be seated. Who's moving the amendment?
I'll move the amendment, Mr. Mayor. Can I thank you and others for allowing this amendment to be heard, and officers who quite diligently and quickly prepared it.
Could you read it out, Councillor
Yes.
O'Brien?
This Council acknowledges that Sunderland voted to leave the European Union in 2016. Furthermore, this Council acknowledges that both the Conservative and Labour parties gave a commitment to the British public at the 2017 general election to leave the European Union with a deal. We therefore call upon our city's 3 MPs to honour both of those results by facilitating the UK's exit from the EU with a deal. We insert that earlier this month, the government suspended Parliament, effectively ending scrutiny and oversight of its plans to exit the European Union. This Council also acknowledges that this suspension of Parliament has been ruled unlawful in the courts in Scotland and is currently being heard in the Supreme Court. Accordingly, Council calls upon the city's 3 MPs to lobby the government to urgently to recall Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Point of order. Just on the Rules of Procedure, Section 1, Part 12, on notices on notice. It's my opinion, Mr. Mayor, that this amendment would negate the original motion. We're here talking around leaving the European Union with the deal. It's got nothing to do with prorogation. So I would seek your opinion, Mr. Mayor, and that is the amendment. Is it allowable, given the fact that I believe it negates the original meaning of the now amended motion? Thank you.
Just going to take some advice from this for a moment.
Thank you.
Deputy Leader, thank you for your comments. On this occasion, as a matter of fairness, I will hear Councillor O'Brien and we'll see what he has to say.
Mr. Mayor, point of order. Sorry. Hello. Sorry, of course. Because this matter is currently being debated in the Supreme Court as we speak, does that bring this motion into any problems or anything like that?
Who seconded the motion, please?
Mr. Mayor, I seconded the motion.
Councillor O'Brien, do you want to speak to the motion?
Yes, I'll speak to the motion. Colleagues, the government is trying to stop us from getting the deal. I think that's quite obvious by the prorogation of Parliament. And I, for one, who has travelled from Remain to compromise to trying to support Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, you've made me a hardened Remainer. I don't want to leave the European Union without a deal. And Boris Johnson is acting like a tin pot dictator to get his own way. It's just unbelievable. He's even lied to the Queen. The man has lied to Her Majesty. That's like me lying to me Nana. It's like me lying to Nana Body. It's utterly unbelievable. I think it's not only our privilege but our duty to act as representatives and try and get this government to sit and try and get a bloody deal, because I for one think a deal is best, and we put that deal to the people and let the chips fall where they may. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wood, I believe you seconded the motion. And do you want to speak now?
Right to speak, Mr. Mayor?
Sorry, you didn't reserve the right to speak.
All right, I don't need to say anything in addition to...
Can you stand up, please?
Sorry, I thought I was. It's my back. No, Mr. Mayor, I don't have any extra to add.
Does anybody else want to speak to this?
Leader. Councillor MacDonald.
Is that it?
So, Mr. Mayor, that's Councillor MacDonald and the leader to speak on the amendment.
Councillor MacDonald, would you like to speak, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm excited.
Can I just remind you that you are speaking to the amendment?
The amendment, yes. Amendment. Don't worry, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you. I'm slightly perplexed as to why this has been brought to council. Obviously, we have no power over this whatsoever. But the big thing is, yes, Parliament was taken out 5 days early. Now that was at the end of the longest parliamentary session in 400 years. As we sit here, we're in party conference season. I believe you yourself, did you travel to party conference? I believe you did. We would not be in Parliament now anyway. It would not make any difference. It was 5 days early. I think that the Liberal Democrats are just trying to make a bit of trouble here with this. We know what the Liberal Democrat position is on Brexit at the minute, and quite frankly, it is shameful. You are not representing the people of this city, 61.3% of whom voted Leave, and they were very clear in that. I think this is shameful by the Liberal Democrats, I think it's opportunistic, and I will not be voting for this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Leader?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just want to remind Councillor O'Brien of something that he was saying when I came into the chamber to somebody else. This is democracy under Labour's terms. Directly in reference to the fact that this meeting had been adjourned quite sensibly last night through to its duration to come in here today. I would like to point out to Councillor O'Brien that democracy under this Labour group means that this is why you're getting to put your amendment forward, because there was no rule or procedure to allow you to do it. Otherwise we could have just said no and it would have fallen, because there's nothing to allow it. I want democracy. I was happy for your amendment to come forward. So you can't complain about us and then expect us to allow. So just bear it in future, please, Councillor O'Brien. Now, I cannot support the amendment, because the amendment is totally irrelevant to the amended motion from the Conservative Party that we amended to make sure that there was a change regarding leaving with the deal. This is like trying to put a second tail on the dog, and it just doesn't work. I do agree with the sentiment that Councillor O'Brien is bringing forward. You know, at the end of the day, the proroguing of Parliament, in my personal opinion, whilst it is only adding 5 days to the prorogation process over the conference season, was clearly a complicit decision and attempt by Boris Johnson to take 5 days out of parliamentary scrutiny of the Brexit process. And everybody, commentators, everybody accepts that. So that isn't right. I think it was grossly unfair. Whether he lied to the Queen or not, well, he certainly didn't tell her the truth. That's the splitting of a hair there, isn't it? So this cannot be added on to the end of the motion that we are referring to regarding our MPs being asked to basically try and ensure that a Brexit deal is delivered. This is an entirely separate issue, so I'll be voting against the amendment, and I hope the group and everybody else supports that.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor O'Brien, you have the right to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got no comment. Thank you.
Can we vote on this?
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, if I may. Do I have the right to reply to the amendment as well? No, that's fine. That's all right. That's fine.
Right, can we vote on this amendment, please?
Mr Mayor, there are 3 votes in favour, no abstentions, 37 votes against, and therefore the amendment is defeated.
Can I ask at this point if the substantive motion as amended by the Labour amendment isn't agreed? Agreed. Thank you. The next item on tonight is what the day or this afternoon feels like tonight. I'm not quite sure what time of day it is. Anyway, the next item for this evening is reports, which includes a report of the leader on special urgency decisions, together with a report on appointments. We will take these in turn, starting with the leader's report on special urgency decisions. Leader, would you please move the report?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I so move the report and there will be no need to have any special urgency decisions.
Deputy Leader, do you second the report?
I second the report, Mr Mayor.
Does Council agree to receive the report? Agree. Next we'll deal with the report on appointments. Leader, will you please move the report?
I so move the report, Mr Mayor.
Deputy Leader, do you second the report? That was very quick. Leader, do you wish to speak to the report?
No, I think we've had quite enough speaking today, Mr Mayor.
Deputy Leader, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Is the report agreed? Agreed. Thank you, everybody. That concludes the meeting.
Please be upstanding for the right worship of the mayor.